Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope. With me today is Jim Barnard. He has dealt with disappointment and distress many times, which led to significant depression. His wife, Alisha, had two near-death experiences and was not able to carry a pregnancy to term. How heart-wrenching. This also added to Jim's severe anxiety. But that's only the beginning of the story. Jim is going to share how to turn an impossibility into a possibility.
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Thank you for joining me today on Never Ever Give Up Hope. The gentleman here today is Jim Barnard. He has a story that is going to touch you and it is going to excite you, because you will see a man who has suffered much with his wife, and yet someone who is here to encourage you. When Jim and Alisha started dating and then planning their future together, they took the vow, when they got married, to support one another through sickness and in health. Very often when couples make that vow, they have no idea that within a matter of months, weeks, their lives could totally and completely change. 3 months later, that vow was put to the ultimate test. Welcome, Jim.
Carol, it is so good to be here. Thank you for having me today.
So my first question to you is, tell us your story, please.
Yeah, it's quite a story, all right. Great introduction. I really appreciate that. When I was getting married 16 years ago, I really had no concept of what I was about to step into. I was naturally really excited about marriage and, had met my wife at church and was just really taken by her. She's super smart and strong-willed, and I was finding myself having a lot of enthusiasm while also having some fear about what marriage could be. And so we dated for a year and a half, and I tried to muster up my courage to ask her to marry me. And when I finally got the courage to ask her to marry me, she said yes. It was a really pathetic, proposal, but she said yes, and we had a very short engagement. It was 10 weeks long because of a venue issue, and that seemed really absurd at the time. Like, why are we doing this to ourselves? But we were able to put together a really great wedding, and it was so much fun. Like, obviously the best wedding I've ever been to, And then, we had all these hopes and expectations for what marriage was going to be. And, my sweet wife, Alisha, being, a type A personality and just so much fun and funny and cool. I thought, man, we were just going to crush our life together. And when she got sick 3 months into our marriage, at first it was like she had the stomach flu or something. She couldn't keep any food down. And so I was like, okay, no big deal. A week, 2 weeks later, you'll be fine. I didn't think much of it at first. But after a week or two, it just wasn't going away. And we started to panic. Like, she was vomiting a ton.
Wow.
So we started going to the emergency room and visiting doctors, trying to get some answers. Like, we were quickly very desperate. No one could really pinpoint what was happening. And we met one really kind GI doctor who wanted to do a ton of tests to try to establish what the problem was. But in St. Louis, where we lived at the time, their facility didn't quite have all the greatest, testing materials. So he sent us up to the Mayo Clinic up in Rochester, Minnesota. And, it's a fine town. It's just a terrible place to send sick people in the middle of winter, and so Alisha had to spend 3 months up in Rochester. And it was awful because I couldn't spend a lot of time up there with her. I had just burned all my vacation time for the wedding and the honeymoon. And so we had friends and family stay with her when I couldn't be up there. But, that Mayo experience was really conflicting for us because, I was able to go up and do the first appointment to kind of set the tone for what things were going to be. And, the doctor had 15 minutes with us at the beginning, and he just kind of asked us the pat questions about, her history, her background, what's going on. He didn't seem to know a lot from, the doctors that we had in St. Louis. And it seemed like he maybe didn't have enough time to read her chart to see what was maybe happening. So a lot of his info was coming from us, and that's fine. We did our best to represent ourselves. And over the 3 months, I can't tell you, Carol, the tests that she did were humiliating and hard and excruciating. It's tests like anal rectal manometry. Doesn't that sound just awful?
Oh, exciting. Yes.
Yeah. She had to do this thing called biofeedback where a woman would sit underneath her and teach her how to relax and how to bear down because they thought maybe she had, kind of forgotten how to go to the bathroom properly. Like it was humiliating. It's so hard. And then at the end of the 3 months, it was like, okay, we're done. We got through all this. We're finally going to have some answers and some game plan of how we're going to approach whatever this problem is. And this doctor, as he comes back in, he's like, all right, listen, Alisha, we don't have much time. We just have 15 minutes together. So I just need to cut to the chase. And he says, Alisha, I think that you're a ruminator. And I said, like, I didn't know what that meant. I'm sitting there like, what kind of medical term is that? And Alisha, being smarter than me, she got it right away. And she's like, I'm sorry. Do you think I'm nuts? Do you think I'm crazy or something? And he said, no, not nuts, not crazy. I just think that you've got some things in your life that you haven't quite dealt with completely. And it might be really good for you to get some counseling. And if you were able to deal with some of these things, the physical problems that you're experiencing would go away. And this was shocking to me. I'm like, hold on, wait, what? Like, you don't know my wife, man. Like, she's the total package. She is so put together. Like, she doesn't have emotional or mental problems. But Carol, in this moment, I can't speak up. Like, I don't know how to be an advocate for my wife. I don't know how to speak up. And it's one of my life's greatest regrets, honestly, is those 15 minutes just sitting there observing and not doing anything. Now, certainly Alisha didn't actually need my help. She was more than capable of standing up for herself. And she's like, Doctor, I've seen counselors. I don't understand what you're talking about. Where are you getting this from? And he references something that she answered in the first initial 15 minutes, 3 months prior, about how, she had a dad who, was kind of abusive. And he's seen this so many times that girls with an abusive dad, they're going to have, these kind of major physical problems. And so we've got to deal with that trauma of abuse. And, Alisha defended herself by saying, well, hang on, like, my dad's not a good dude. And there might have been like abuse between like him and my mom, but, it was hard for me to deal with, and I don't have a good relationship with him. But truly, I've spent a lot of time processing through that. And, help me understand, what about this test? What about the anal rectal manometry? What about the biofeedback? What about the sweat test? What about this and that? And, every time she would ask, he would open up the chart seemingly for the first time.
Oh, my word.
You'd be like, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that is interesting. I don't know. And he just wasn't prepared. He had made a decision and put her through seemingly hell for 3 months just to say, yeah, it's mental, it's emotional. And he said, all right, I'm sorry, guys, my time's up. I need to get on to another patient. If you need a referral for a counselor, let my office know. It was really good to meet you. And, we just had to let him go. We had to sit in that defeat. And that drive from Minnesota down to St. Louis was really, really defeating. But to pull the story a little bit further, got back to St. Louis, and that doctor that referred us up to Mayo obviously wanted to hear, what happened? What was the outcome? And so we sat down with him, and he had all the, reports and charts and test results. And we're sitting there, and he's taking his time. He's really looking through this stuff carefully. And, we kind of shared, his conclusion. And I was terrified, Carol. I remember sitting in that room feeling like I was going to puke, because I really was convinced that, he was going to affirm this expert's decision, his conclusion. Yeah, you're a crazy person, Alisha, and then we'd be, out of luck. What do we do? I kind of secretly hoped that that she was a ruminator, but I knew in my heart that this wasn't a mental problem. This was a physical problem. And thankfully, this doctor broke the tension and looked up at Alisha and said, "Honey, it is not in your head. It is in your gut. I'm so sorry this doctor was rude to you and dismissive, but I'm really grateful that you had this experience at Mayo, because these tests, I would have never been able to get this stuff done, at least as quickly as you were able to get it done. And now we can start working towards some answers." And, pretty quickly he had identified that the core of her disease, which I should probably explain, right, Carol? What is this thing? It's a disease called Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another: gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
This story that we are listening to today is absolutely one of a kind. I have never heard of this disease before. And what you and your wife, Jim and Alisha, have gone through is unique. But I also understand from who you are, the little bit that I've gotten to know you online, is you have a phenomenal story to share as far as how you've been victorious as well. So pick it up now by explaining what the disease is and how the diagnosis was arrived.
Yeah, perfect. So it's a disease called Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. It is a connective tissue disease that you've probably seen in other people. Contortionists have it located in their joints. So they've got a hyperflexibility in their joints that allow them to go beyond the natural range of motion. And Alisha's version isn't that cool joint version where you've got some neat party tricks. Her version tends to be localized in her abdomen. So her digestive system has no muscle tone pushing food through. And so the reason she was vomiting so much is she would eat something and it would get clogged. And then anything else that she would eat, there would just be, no room in the inn. And so she would just be puking and puking and puking. And, it goes beyond her digestive system. All of her core organs in her abdomen had prolapsed or fallen out of place. And eventually she got cow tissue and meshing and tacks trying to keep everything where it's supposed to be. And so this doctor started to identify all this stuff, and he realized that the majority of the disease, the Ehlers-Danlos, was kind of located in the colon. And so he wanted to, do a temporary ileostomy where she would have a bag to sorry to be crude, but to poop in, just stuck to the side of her belly. And, if they bypassed the colon, would she get better? And she did. And so he removed the colon. And for a season after that surgery, Alisha got better. She actually was starting to improve. I was getting my wife back. This was so exciting and so promising. When they biopsied the colon, the doctor came and told us that it was really interesting. Her colon was, paper thin, but PVC pipe hard. And they had never seen a colon like this. The conclusion is that if she didn't have her colon removed exactly when it was, she probably would have perforated and gone septic within weeks or months, no more than that. Like the colon was, that fragile. So it truly was in her gut, not in her head. And since then, Carol, she's just continued to go downhill because the disease has spread through her digestive system, and she's had to go on a liquid diet, and she's gotten so sick and so fragile that she can't drive and she can no longer work, and things are really hard. To where we sit today, my wife is probably a measly 67 pounds, and
oh my goodness,
she's skin and bones and fragile, and a lot of life is lived on the couch. She makes the most of her life on the couch. We try to find adventure wherever we can, but she's pretty limited because of this disease and what's happened over this long period of time. It's been insanely hard. I wish I could share all the stories with you, but that's just one example of a story that has just been so hard and yet so crazy how she's been able to fight through this consistently.
And they don't have any answers at this point for any kind of treatment or experience with somebody else who has had the same thing?
No, ma'am. There's really nothing that anyone can do about this because it degenerates your tissue over time. And I know that there's a lot of research happening around Ehlers-Danlos, and there's some money that's being invested there, and so there's some hope. But at this point, all you can do is really try to deal with the symptoms and cope as best as you can. And to Alisha's credit, she does a great job. She really, without her smarts and her strong-willed nature, I don't know if she would have survived this long. She's really advocated well for herself, and her and I have been incredibly united and have chosen hope in the face of suffering, which is obviously profoundly hard. But I just feel like the same way that, we have a concept for what daytime is because the sun goes away and we experience night, the same thing with suffering and hope. We've got a context for hope because there is suffering, because the hope seems to go away, but the hope is real. It's not actually gone. We have to fight for it. We have to choose it. We have to be a little proactive. And Alisha's helped me learn that in so many profound ways.
I have no words. I'm sure as you have shared your story in other venues, they probably have responded the same way.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
The fact that both of you have the attitude that you do is a miracle in itself. But what we're going to talk about now is this led you with a passion to want to help others. And I'd like you to share that journey, then share with us what Tiller coaching is.
Absolutely. That's a privilege to be able to share that. I call my all the suffering that we've gone through, I call it an expectation gap. So if you think about it, when I got married, I had high hopes and expectations for what our marriage was going to be like, our life together. And reality came in far underneath those expectations. And the difference between reality and those hopes and expectations, that expectation gap, has been full of disappointment and dissatisfaction and distress. It has been unfathomably hard. And for a lot of that time, I've chosen to walk through that alone. And that's my own fault. Part of that is depression that you alluded to earlier. Some of that is not having necessarily close friends. 11 years ago when we moved away from St. Louis to Colorado, we didn't know anyone here. It was a really hard season for us to be completely isolated. And I just know that in those expectation gaps, those 3Ds that I described, we should not be walking alone in them. That is the last thing we need to do. And so I started this organization where I would give away coaching for others that are experiencing the expectation gap. I've become an expert in how to handle these gaps, and it's not easy. And there's no one particular answer of how to handle it, but the one universal truth is that we should not walk alone. And so I get to walk with people in their hurt and their suffering and their gaps, and I just give it away. I don't charge anyone for this kind of coaching. I raise my funds to be able to give it away, and it really, like, it honestly helps me, Carol.
Of course.
I think the two greatest ways to overcome expectation gaps is, one, to have gratitude, just to find gratitude in anything and everything. And I work really hard on a daily basis to do that. But the other way is to serve others. And so this is me serving others, and I overcome my expectation gap by serving others in their expectation gaps. And it's truly the greatest thing I've ever done. I've done it for the last 3 years now, and it's truly a privilege to walk with guys and to walk with couples in the midst of these hard things. I've got a website called tillercoaching.org. Anyone can book an appointment on there. I keep certain hours open, and anyone can book an appointment free of charge, and we'll set up a Zoom appointment, or if they're local in the Denver area, they can come into my office, and we'll start by sharing our stories. I will share a fuller story of suffering and expectation gaps, and ask them to share their own story and be authentic. I think authenticity is so important for us. And if we can be authentic with each other, we've got a chance of maybe truly walking together and truly overcoming these things. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
And what about your book? Tell us about your book.
Oh, my book. I love my book. I actually love and hate my book at the same time, because it is, 28 chapters of just pain. It is, it describes hundreds of nights in the hospital, dozens of surgeries, and 2 near-death experiences where I'm holding my wife just lifeless in my arms, and scared out of my mind, like, what is happening right now? And just describing how all of these, hard events were also coupled with absurd happenings. And Carol, not to be but so blunt, but I think those absurd happenings were God working in our lives and, showing us glimpses of hope, giving us things to be grateful for. And, I really think that God showed up in absurd ways in our story, and to be able to share that story and to share, all of those different tidbits and thoughts and just even like goofy bits of humor just to break the tension, all of it was really good for me to process. But the response has been tremendous by people that, people are walking through their expectation gaps. Sometimes it's sickness, sometimes it's divorce, sometimes it's death, sometimes it's who knows what it is. These things, all have a similar element to it, and it's that we don't know how to respond. And you get a firsthand look at a husband that has no idea how to respond to any of this. And it was obviously very scary for me. And I really want this book to demonstrate that this is doable, that you can overcome. In my studies, I learned that couples are so much more likely to divorce when there's a sick spouse, when especially if it's chronic illness, like Alisha has. And when it's the wife that has the illness, couples are up to 7 times more likely to divorce, because guys just don't know how to do this. We choose isolation a lot, and we kind of shut down our feelings. And, it was a privilege to share with men and couples this story that, yeah, I did that. I buried myself into work, and I chose isolation, and I figured it out, and I was able to have people come alongside of me and hold my arms up when I'm weak and weary. And it really is a beautiful book. As much as it was hard for me to write, it really turned out fantastic.
Do you share other places as well?
I speak anywhere I can. I don't turn down any opportunities. This past weekend, I shared my story at a church, and got an opportunity to just sit down with a few people and care for them, probably set up a few coaching appointments along the way. And, I promote this book on a website called The Suffering Guy. I've got, all the social media. I'm trying to get on as many podcasts as possible. I just feel an intense calling to share our story, even though it's not easy to share. I can get on this and be pretty concise and share it without a lot of emotions. But at first that wasn't easy for me, Carol. I'd share about my wife seemingly dead in my arms, and it's like I'm bawling as I tell it. Now the power has been kind of stripped away. So all of this has helped me immensely, and if it's helped other people, it's absolutely worth it.
I sincerely thank you for sharing your story with my audience today. I am touched. I am moved. I am so grateful that you feel comfortable enough to share, and what an encouragement it is to anyone who may be suffering, along with your book and your coaching. You are the poster boy for never ever give up hope.
I didn't want that, Carol. I mean, honestly, I did not want that at all. The title of my book is The Suffering Guy, and it was, for a long time I worked in a church as a pastor, and anytime someone would come to church for the first time, and they might share with like the person at the welcome booth or something, hey, I'm checking out church. I'm going through some stuff. My mom recently died, or I've been diagnosed with cancer, and I'm just kind of checking out church. I'm checking out God right now. And anytime those stories would be shared, it was like, oh, you should meet Jim. He's the suffering guy. Like,
Oh.
He's the one that can help you with that, because no one knows what to do with that. It's like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm like, are you okay? Or, whatever. And so people would get passed off to me, and it's kind of where all of that desire for coaching came from, was like, I was just being confronted with it all the time. I'm like, I don't want to be the suffering guy. Like, I don't want that to be the thing people know of me. I wish I was like the guy whose family owned an island. Like that story would crush at a party. I don't want this moniker, but it's the one I've been given. It's the story I've been given in my life. So I got to use it, and I think there's so much power in story. Everyone's got a powerful story, and we all have to get comfortable learning how to use that.
That was an incredible summary to what you have already shared, and I really thank you for sharing that. If there's anything else you want to add, please do. Otherwise, we will close and look forward to a good report.
I want that. I pray for that. I hope for that. But you know what, Carol? I got to say that even if this ends up the way I assume it's going to, which it could happen any day. I could lose Alisha today, tomorrow, next month. I have no idea. I can tell you today that all of it is worth it. And to be able to serve others with this story, I wouldn't trade anything for it. So I know how hard and how absurd that sounds to live with that kind of gratitude, but I can tell you it's real, and it wasn't easy to get to, but I'm really grateful that I have it now.
Thank you again, Jim, for being on Never, Ever Give Up Hope.
My pleasure. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you for listening to Never, Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.